Here we go. Thank you. Good night.
Is that a vegetarian campaign?
Yeah, right. Thank you, Mr. Kubrick, for Power and Technology. Amazing statement. You may remember that scene goes on and it ends with a bone being thrown up in the air and spinning, and it becomes the spaceship. All right, so what are we talking about? Power and technology. What is the word technology? I love etymology. You can learn so much from it. So the Greek word is techne, and from 1610s in English, it's meant a discourse or treatise on an art or the arts. A discourse or treatise on the art, on an art or the arts, from the Greek technologia, logia, the systematic treatment of an art, craft, or technique. So you get the sense here of not just a craft, but talking about the craft, studying the craft, the logia. That's what that means. Originally referring to techne, and we'll come back to this with Plato, art, skill, craft in work, a particular art or craft. A distinction not made really in the ancient world between art and craft. Method system, well, I shouldn't say that. I guess Plato makes, anyway, we'll get into it. From texna, craft, the particular craft of weaving or fabricating. To weave or fabricate. I like that. And so, related to the word text, which, of course, anything written, but also literally a thing woven. So, weaving, textuality, and I like the way Robert Bringhurst puts it in The Element of Typographic Style. The notion of text and techne, an ancient metaphor. Thought is a thread, and the raconteur is a spinner of yarns, but the true storyteller, the poet, is a weaver. And you may remember that there are great weavers in classical literature, like Penelope, who waits for Odysseus, and Calypso, who has Odysseus on her island. Continuing, the scribes made this old and audible abstraction into a new and visible fact. After long practice, their work took on such an even, flexible texture that they called the written page a textus, which means cloth. The ancient technologist, in the Greek world at least, was Hephaestus. You may not know him. He doesn't get a lot of press. Like technology itself, he works in the background, but he's a really interesting and important character. He was the god of the smiths. He was a smith himself because he used fire, which was the main technology in the ancient world, but because he used fire, he could work in iron, copper, gold, or silver, or everything else. He was the son of Zeus and Hera. Some say that Hera, being angry at Zeus because he had fathered Athena, gave birth, without Hera's help, by the way, gave birth to Hephaestus alone, which is interesting. So Zeus, you remember Athena is born from his head, and there is a story where Hephaestus is born from Hera's head. Then it was another story where, to let Athena out, Zeus swallows Metis, Athena's mother, right as she's about to give birth, but he's too late. She's already coming out. But he swallows her, and Hephaestus, in another story, splits open Zeus's head so Athena can pop out. Athena's an interesting goddess. We should talk about her some more sometime. We find Hephaestus in Prometheus Bound by Aeschylus. He says this to Prometheus. You remember Prometheus is one of the Titans. He is a trickster who tricks the Titans, especially Zeus, into bringing the humans fire. Speaking of Hephaestus and Vulcan, as he's named in Rome. He says this to Prometheus. Prometheus is punished by being chained to a rock while an eagle eats away his liver. He says this, against my will, no less than yours, Prometheus, I must rivet you with brazen bonds, such as the prize you have gained for your championship of the humans. Hephaestus, again from Prometheus Bound, O handicraft that I hate so much. O techne, that I hate so much. Kratos says, why hate it? Since in truth your craft is in no way to blame for these present troubles. Hephaestus, nevertheless, I wish it had fallen to another's lot. You can go right there, from there, to contemporary discussions of technology. I hate this, but this is me. This is what I use. Hephaestus was lame in his legs, probably because he was thrown out of Olympus and landed roughly. Zeus cast him out of heaven because, he invents a chair for Hera, Zeus's wife, and she sits in it, and he has it so that all these clamps come and hold her there. And so I know, it's pretty rough. And so he is thrown out of heaven, lands in the sea. So he tricks her. There's so many stories here, so there's not one story. In fact, the more profound the god, the more the stories. Some say that Dionysus made him drunk and carried him back into Olympus. Hephaestus was married to Aphrodite, the goddess of love. Let me say that again. That guy who's kind of hunched over and he can't walk right, he fell from Olympus, and he's a workman. He works with fire. He was married to Aphrodite. But she loved Ares, of course, and slept with him whenever she could, but Hephaestus traps them in bed together through one of his inventions. And that all the gods laugh for once at Aphrodite and Ares instead of Hephaestus. He attempted to have intercourse with Athena, but she resisted him, and his seed fell onto the ground, onto Gaia, and so another god was born. Hephaestus is a technologist. He is a crafter. He is a maker, a weaver of things. He gave King Aeetes brazen-footed bulls that puffed fire from their mouths. He also wrought the famous necklace of Harmonia, and he made a bed forged of gold in which the sun is carried in sleep. He's the god. He's the guy making all the stuff in Greek mythology. He gave a golden breastplate to Hercules, and as we'll see, he made Achilles' shield, or he replaced Achilles' shield so that he could go and fight in Troy again. He also made a robot named Talos. I'm talking about a Greek god. Isn't that amazing? He made a robot. Here is the text from Pseudo-Apollodorus from the 2nd century of the Common Era. After the Argonauts, Jason and the Argonauts, left the island of Anafe, they were prevented from landing at Crete by Talos. This creature, some say, was once of the bronze generation and actually a bronze man. Others hold that he was given to Minos by Hephaestus and was a bull. He had one blood vessel that was extended from his neck down to his ankles, the lower end of which was held in place by a bronze stud. So, right, you can see what's going to happen already. Talos would run around the island rapidly 3 times a day as a security patrol. And in that capacity, when he saw Jason's ship, the Argo, sailing toward the shore, he threw stones at it. He died from the deceits of Medea. We should talk about Medea sometime, Jason's wife, the witch. Some say she drove him mad with drugs, but I like this story, that she promised to make him immortal and then removed the stud. So all his blood ran out. His E-core, it was called. Some sort of Terminator juice, I guess. The phrase sardonic laugh actually is related to Talos, this robot, this creature. It's called sardonios gelos, and it is a proverb applied to those laughing at their own death. So in one story told by Simonides, 6th century BC, a very old story in fact, says that the Sardinians were there and met Talos, this robot, this giant robot, the crafted man, he calls him, and they attacked him, and he grabbed them, Talos did, and jumped into a fire with them. Being made of bronze, the text says, and clasping them to his breast, he killed them with their mouths open. So it's like, the sardonic laugh, those laughing at their own death. This is a Terminator, basically, and in a kind of inversion of Terminator 2, right? So he takes everybody with him into the molten lead. And of course, we know Hephaestus mainly, if we know him at all, as the crafter, the techne of Achilles' shield. Now, you may remember from the Iliad that Achilles is a brooding but brilliant warrior, and he loses his best friend, possibly lover, Patroclus, in battle. Hector kills him, and thinking that he's Achilles because he has Achilles' armor. So this breaks Achilles' heart, and Hector now has his armor and his love. Patroclus is dead, so the gods conspire, Athena and the others conspire to have a new shield made for Achilles, the shield of Achilles. There's a great poem by W.H. Auden about the shield of Achilles, which he writes on the eve of World War II. And so it's a very dark and hopeless poem. There's a great scholar, Eva Brand, who makes much of this shield of Achilles, and there it is. This shield, she says, over which Ajax kills himself and which Odysseus loses, so the humans can't really handle this shield, even though it was ostensibly made for them, it is like no other thing ever owned by a human being. It's techne, it's a technology. It's not imaginable as a mere trophy for display as other shields, but neither could either of the two contestants have borne it into battle. So it's not useful in that sense either. Not Ajax, because his enormous stature demands a much larger shield, nor Odysseus, because he would have tripped over it. He's too small. Achilles' old armor had to be shrunk to fit Hector, and he's probably a big man, the Trojan. There's a phrase that Homer uses in both his poems, the Iliad and the Odyssey, to express his admiration for such artifacts, such technology. And in English, it comes across as a wonder to behold. But the shield that Hephaestus makes for Achilles seems to be even more than that for Homer. It's some amazing thing that we would recognize as technology, something that's so much larger, more powerful than us. And Homer says, first he wrought the earth, Hephaestus wrought the earth, the star-studded heaven and sea, and in it he placed the great might of the river ocean around the outermost rim of the solidly made shield. And the word here for solidly made, can mean wisely made shield. This is virtual reality. It's an early attempt at virtual reality. Now, Hephaestus, interestingly enough, is, well, the scholar here says he is the most physically vivid of the gods. I like that phrase, physically vivid of the gods. He is severely disabled, and he's known as Crooked Foot, Hephaestus the Crooked Foot. He is a god for whom there are more physical consequences than any other god in the Greek pantheon. Things happen in the world because of Hephaestus. Interestingly, he is derided. So he is uniquely powerful, but also uniquely derided by the other gods. He's a buffoon. He's always huffing and puffing around. He serves them wine, the gods, and they mock him and laugh at him. The primal techne is to be laughed at. But the shield that he crafts is a disc-shaped world, the image of the world that Homer saw in his mind's eye, that Achilles will lose. And in it are two cities. You can kind of tell, I hope, from the image. One is at peace, celebrating marriages with possessions and processions and music and dancing, while the women stand at their doors marveling. There's also a judicial case being heard in this world by the elders, and they're cheering onlookers and people looking on in joyful recreation. The other city here is Troy, a city beleaguered and about to be destroyed, about to be handed over. On the old city wall, men and women watch and wait for the city to fall. There's also the country on the shield. Remember, this is virtual reality of the ancient world, a fallow farm and plowing, and at each turn of the oxen, the plowman is served a cup of honey and wine. There are reapers and binders, a king, etc. There's dancing, there's golden youths whirling, there's a potter at a wheel producing art or craft, and it's all encompassed by the river ocean, as it should be in Greek mythology. Eva Brand says, Hephaestus, the maker of self-moving tripods, which he was, he made robots, knows how to make moving pictures in this frame. She says, it is that Homer imputes to this God, the power of bringing stasis to life in a shield, because he has it himself. He is the creator. He is the poet, the maker, the techne. Homer speaks and a sounding vision arises, but Hephaestus works and things happen. And both Homer and Hephaestus, she says, encompass a complete world with all its opposition, variety, war, peace, city, country, civilization, wilderness. And this is the last thing that the combatants in the Iliad see. Hector sees it minutes before his death, a world that has repelled his thrust. Achilles sees it before his death. To conclude, the Homeric world, she says, the poets and the artisans' world, is in its visible surface indefensibly beautiful no matter what happens within it. Dancing youths and devouring lions, wine-refreshed plowmen and brutal ambushes are all equally golden. This is, after all, the truth about the Iliad itself, a blood and guts poem of unfailing beauty, which, through all its similes and storied recollections, draws all the ordained labors and graceful recreations of the peaceful world into itself. So this is no mere shield, right? This is some sort of early virtual reality that contains the world, because the river ocean surrounds it all. And within that world is our world. All the good and the bad, the beauty and the ugliness, life and death. It is a virtual world on a shield. By the way, this is a very old thing that's happening here. I remember going to a conference on an Indian reservation in Cody, Wyoming, and some of the Blackfeet were talking about how their shields were basically moons, and so they were reflecting the moon at the time of the battle or at the time they made the shield or whatever. It was a message, a meaning. It was a kind of world on the shield. And again, that gets to that notion of art not being separated from craft. You need a shield, right? You need something to protect you, and yet we human beings like to do more than just function. We like to make meaning, even of a shield, especially of a shield, because maybe it's the shield that keeps death away, keeps us alive. And so we ornament it, we make it mean. We make a virtual world of it. Plato, too, has a story of technology, and it's an Egyptian story of the god Tooth, or Tot, that you may know. There he is. And the story goes like this in Plato, the Timaeus, I believe it is. There was a famous old god whose name was Tooth. The bird which is called the ibis is sacred to him, and he was the inventor of many arts. So there's always one of these people, right? In indigenous cultures, it's often the twins who are born of the matriarch, the woman who fell from the sky, for example. She falls pregnant, she gives birth to twins, and these twins are called culture heroes because they bring culture, how to do things. This Egyptian god is the inventor of many arts, such as arithmetic, calculation, geometry, astronomy, draughts, and dice. His great discovery, however, was the use of letters, writing. Now, in those days, the god Thamus was king of the whole country of Egypt, and he dwelled in that great city of Upper Egypt called Thebes, and the god himself is called by them Ammon. To them came Tooth and showed his inventions, desiring that the other Egyptians might be allowed to have the benefit of them. He enumerated them. Here they are, he said. And Thamus inquired about their several uses and praised some of them and censured others as he approved or disapproved of them. It would take a long time to repeat all that Thamus said to Tooth in praise or blame of the various arts. But when they came to letters, to writing. This, said Tooth, will make the Egyptians wiser and give them better memories. I'm talking about one of our oldest technologies, writing. It is specific for both the memory and the wit. Thamus replied, "Oh, ingenious Tooth, the parent and inventor of an art, is not always the best judge of its utility or inutility of his own inventions to the users of them." Take note, the creator of a technology is not always the best judge of its users. I don't know if that applies today. In this instance, you, who are the father of letters, from a paternal love of your own children, have been led to attribute them, these letters, to the children, a quality which they cannot have. For this discovery of yours will create forgetfulness in the learner's souls, because they will not use their memories, because they will learn to write. They will trust to the external written characters outside of them and not remember themselves inside of them. The specific which you have discovered is an aid not to memory, but to reminiscence. And you give your disciples not truth, but only the semblance of truth. They will be the hearers of many things and will have learned nothing. They will appear to be omniscient with this new technology of writing and will generally know nothing. They will be tiresome company, having the show of wisdom without the reality. This is the source of Plato's great condemnation of writing for the same reasons, and using writing to do it, such as technology, right? He's not wrong. He's not wrong. Writing is a great technology, obviously, and we've talked about it in here before many times. But like every technology, the tool we use changes the world, but it also changes us. And to move from spoken language to written language is a massive transformation in human culture and in the human psyche. And I don't want to spend too much time on this, but just imagine for a moment if there's no writing, or what Walter Ong now calls secondary orality, video or other images. There's no text, there's no video, there's nothing. Is there knowledge? There is. There is knowledge. You still need knowledge. You still need to know that there's a mountain lion that lives on that mesa over there. So if you go wandering over there, you might want to be careful. You better know that if you head toward the arroyo, that you'll find water under the juniper, just beside the great rock. You need to know things without writing. How do you know them? What's your technology for knowledge without writing? Which is, by the way, how most human beings have lived on the planet over our time here, is without writing. The technology is story. It's words in a narrative. And you can do pretty much anything you want without writing. There's some things you can't do, like become abstract. And again, I could go on and on about this, but I'll move on, and we can talk about it in the discussion if you want. It's a good example of how a technology changes us, not just because you can get an email on your watch now, but it changes you psychically. It changes us as a species psychically, right? Just one more example. If I'm in an oral culture and I want to share something, I have to be near you. I have to be in your presence. In a literate culture, in a writing culture, I don't have to be anywhere near you. We don't have to be present together. We're in an oral culture right now at this moment. But if I were to ask you to look something up on your phone, our community would be literally lost because you would immediately become individuals. Technology changes us. Writing changed us. And it's a kind of magic. You can almost substitute the word magic for any use of the word technology. We mean it in religious studies and anthropology as a general term that is simply an attempt to control the environment with uncertain outcomes. Or if you're really good, with certain outcomes. Any attempt to control your environment is magic. And we here in the West especially, like to look back and call what they called primitive cultures magical cultures because we don't recognize the magic of our own technology. So they had magic, but we have science. In fact, there's a whole theory of religion based on this by the British anthropologist James George Frazer in his 22-volume work, The Golden Bough, which is a line from the Aeneid. So he says cultures begin with magic, just a kind of hopeful and generally blind attempt to control their environment. Might work, might not. We don't know how it works, but we're going to try it. So if there's a drought, we may sacrifice somebody or something to make it rain. If it doesn't work, it's because we didn't do something right or the gods pissed at us for other reasons. Who knows? Magic, right? The important thing being the attempt to manipulate nature to your own ends. Frazer says religion comes along when you become a little more certain of your outcome. See, we have a priest now, and we have a ritual. And so, okay, basically I just need to go to this guy, and he's going to know what to do. And if I do what he says, or if I let him do what he says he needs to do, it's going to be all right, and I'm going to be batting about 500 now. Or maybe more, who knows? I mean, these are interpretive things, so you can make it 1,000 if you want. And then Frazer says, we here in the early 20th century, we have science. The Latin word to know. We know, right? The irony is, of course, that he was writing just before the advent of World War I, the most horrific war human beings have ever fought. Horrific nerve gas and chemical weapons and absolute madness and no good reason to fight it. And this was the apex, the zenith of human achievement. And we took our science and made weapons so we couldn't escape ourselves. So magic, science, religion, that paradigm doesn't really apply. We live with magic every day. If I go to the doctor, I'm going to a shaman. She's going to do some things. She's going to pull some fluids out of my body, and she's going to read them. Or actually, she's going to get somebody else to read them on some sort of device. And my point is not simplistic. I don't know what's happening. But she and they do, apparently. Doesn't matter. I don't know. They know. They've studied. And they come back and say, well, there are these microscopic things in your body and they're out of whack. And I'm like, okay. And we're going to give you some more things that are going to release more microscopic things, and they're going to fight the other microscopic things. I'm like, okay. I don't know what any of this is. Sure, I could tell you some names about viruses and medicines and antivirals, but I really don't know what that means either. I just know the words. And sure, there are people who know these things, But how did they get to know them? They undertook a shamanic studies program called medical school, where they learned all this special language they have, and they learned how to use these special devices. I'm telling you, it's no different. It's really no different. Magic, as Branislaw Malinowski says, fills the gap. Magic fills the gap. And his work on magic is, well, it's problematic like all these early anthropologists, but I still think he got this right. Magic, he says, serves to reduce anxiety, to fill the void of the unknown, especially for people at a low level, he would say, of technological development. There's that, notion of superiority. Many situations in our lives contain uncertainty, unpredictability. We want some sort of guide. We want certainty, but we'll settle for a good guess. We'll believe the doctor when she prescribes us something, or even sticks a needle in our arm. We'll let her, because we believe. Because that's better. That uncertainty of the needle or the drug is better than uncertainty of what's going on inside me. You could go right from there back to Black Elk, who as a young boy witnessed the massacre of Wounded Knee, and a vision came to him, and he did not speak his vision. He was 14. He didn't know what was happening. It was a massive vision of a good red road and a black road and his people, and it was just too much for him to bear. And so he got sick because he held this vision. And he was almost dead when his parents went to get the shaman, the medicine man. And he said right away, "Did you have a vision?" "Yeah." "Tell me your vision. Not only tell me, let me act it out in a ritual." And that's how he was healed. We come to these gaps all the time. The hunter is disappointed by his prey. The prey gets away. The sailor misses the winds. The canoe builder has to deal with something that doesn't work and it breaks. Or the healthy person suddenly finds himself weak. These anxieties, fears, they induce tension in us, in any organism. And this drives us to do something. Tension and release. Sigmund Freud said that this is the most basic elements of humanity. There is tension and we seek release. There is tension and we feel hunger. The tension is the hunger. And so we eat and the tension is released. This is, according to Malinowski, a basic human activity to use magic to reduce anxiety. Now, it doesn't work completely. What would? But it works for the moment, and the moment's all you need. Witchcraft, sorcery, these are all forms of magic. Technology is a form of magic. Now, what's interesting is there's always been a sort of secrecy surrounding this process, right? Shamans don't tell you how they work. In fact, shamans can't tell you how they work because they live in two worlds. They have a foot in the sacred and the profane. And so even if they tried to tell you how they worked, you wouldn't understand it. Just as if the doctor tried to tell me what she was doing, and she will, because, reduce anxiety. Here's what I'm doing, but I don't really know what she's doing, and she could be doing anything. And so there's a secrecy. You know this. There's been a secrecy around magic for a long time, and there still is. But again, I say the people who know technology are magicians. We lose something if we don't recognize that distinction. That we need magic, that we use it all the time. We just call it technology. You know Arthur C. Clarke's third law? Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. Apparently, J.K. Rowling has a corollary that I didn't know about. Any sufficiently debased magic is indistinguishable from technology. And then, of course, there's Aleister Crowley, who defined magic as the science and art of causing change to occur in conformity with will. All right, sure. That's magic, that's also technology, that's also living life. So, there's still a lot we can learn from the ancient cultures, the primal cultures, who did not have the hang-ups we do about magic and other things. Now, the philosophers have some things to say about technology. Plato, in particular, used that sense of art and craft like I was talking about. He referred to a carpenter's craft knowledge, for example, about how to make art objects from wood. But then he himself kind of expands it to mean craftsmanship of any kind. And he doesn't like this, by the way. We don't have to get into this, but he doesn't like it because you yourself are creating a pale shadow of the form, and there are already enough pale shadows of the true forms. Do you remember this from Plato? It's like everything has a true form, a kind of archetype, but I don't want you to mix that up with Jung, because that's a whole different thing. Anyway, Plato doesn't want people making things. So, for example, a tree is a pale imitation of the perfect idea of tree. So if you make a painting of a tree, what you've done is removed yourself a whole other dimension away from the perfect form. Henceforth, there are no poets in the Republic, in the ideal society. We will not allow them because they make stuff, right? And making stuff takes you further away from the form. Aristotle takes a different approach and is more interested in the things in themselves, but I don't want to inflict Aristotle too much on you. We can talk about the four causes if you want, but I'd rather get to some other interesting things. Francis Bacon, one of the first scientists, proposed, as you know, in modernism, an experiment-based method for understanding nature, and wrote in New Atlantis this vision of a society in which natural philosophy and technology worked in concert. There was no distinction. Well, there was a distinction, but there was no conflict. It was a philosophical project to understand technology. He saw it as an integral part of life, and it is. He's right. And then there is Martin Heidegger, a German philosopher, who talked about technology as not just the examination of a particular craft, like carpentry, or a particular way of doing, like making things. He saw technology as a way of knowing itself. He uses the German word entbergen, which means to uncover. So technology is now not just making things, it's uncovering things. And I kind of like that because it's related to the Greek term aletheia, which means truth. And it kind of follows up on Bacon pretty nicely. So now technology's become itself a way of uncovering things. According to Heidegger, technology is a way of knowing assumed a new nature. Older technology can be thought of as imitating nature. All right, so we're going to replicate something in nature, whereas the process of imitation is inseparably connected to the uncovering of a hidden nature of the thing in itself. Contemporary technology, he says, in contrast, places nature in the position of the supplier of resources. This is an important distinction. Not the thing to be copied, but the supplier of the resources for this new way of knowing. And it places human beings in a unique creator position now. Not just imitating like the poet or the artist, but creating something new. And then there's Jacques Ellul, the philosopher, theologian, all-around Renaissance man. And he gives the warning that you may know of before. Technique, that's what he called it, technique instead of technology, has outgrown human control. Even if we're able to govern individual technologies, technique itself has a life of its own. Here we go. Threatening human freedom and responsibility and suppressing the necessary conditions under which a solution is possible. It's basically saying Skynet is here. And of course, there's no better statement on technology that I know of than Mary Shelley's brilliant novel, Frankenstein. I don't know if you know the story of its creation, if you will, but she and her husband, Percy Shelley, and Lord Byron, and someone he was with, I forget, were on a lake in Geneva in Switzerland, and they were on a vacation, and came a terrible storm, and so they decided to tell ghost stories, have a contest about who could tell the best ghost story. And so they went to bed and started writing, and this is Shelley, the great romantic poet. This is Lord Byron, the great romantic poet. And there's an 18-year-old girl. She comes out the next morning, and we don't know what the other stories were because she came out with Frankenstein, right? So really interesting things going on here, right? Because she's writing and living at the time of some really new, I know we always say that, but these are really new scientific developments like galvanism, the process of plating things and all that. So she uses all that in her story, but it's the story of a creator and creature. Only we now, human beings, Dr. Frankenstein, we are in the place of creator. And so the creature is in our previous place. Notice also that it's a womanless creation. This is a patriarchal creation, born not of woman, but of death, of body parts scavenged from all around. I'm sorry, I got young Frankenstein in my head, so I'm seeing Igor and Abby Normal, sorry. There's this sense of birth anxiety. So it's a womanless creation, but Victor Frankenstein has this incredible anxiety over the birth of his creation. It's almost like a sympathetic postpartum depression in Victor. He says this, for example, Victor says, "I had selected his features as beautiful, beautiful. Great God, his yellow skin scarcely covered the work of muscles and arteries beneath. His hair was of a lustrous black and flowing, his teeth of a pearly whiteness. This is my creation, it's wonderful. But these luxuriances only formed a more horrid contrast with his watery eyes that seemed almost the same color as the dun white sockets in which they were set, his shriveled complexion, his straight black lips." And, well, you know the story, I hope, or one of the stories. It's one of our foundational myths, even though it's fairly recent, and so it gets retold and replayed. This is about the sublime. So if you know Frankenstein only from the films, you don't know the Frankenstein of the novel, who quotes Goethe and Milton and is more articulate than any of us here tonight, this monster. And so he's reaching for the sublime, and yet there's this sense of the ethical, especially on Victor's part. What have I done? I've created something, I've given birth to something, and it's bad. All kinds of stuff going on there. There's a fall that the monster feels. Amazing novel. The monster himself feels the fall. Well, let me read it to you. This is the monster speaking. When I looked around, I saw and heard of none like me. Was I then a monster, a blot upon the earth from which all men fled and whom all men disowned? I cannot describe to you the agony that these reflections inflicted on me. I tried to dispel them, but sorrow only increased with knowledge. Oh, that I had forever remained in my native wood, says the monster, nor known nor felt the sensations beyond hunger, thirst, and heat. But Mary Shelley tells the story of technology for us now, is that our creations become more powerful than us, and we cannot control them, right? And in fact, the monster ends up killing everything dear to Victor. Anyway, I could talk all night about Frankenstein. It's such an amazing work. But closing up here, there's a wonderful little essay by Walter Benjamin, if you don't know. It's called The Work of Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction, and it applies to what we're doing tonight. So he says that works of art have always been reproducible, of course, but the technological, what he calls the technological reproduction of art, is something new. He's writing in the 20th century. The first is the effect upon the original work of art. So if you have a photograph and you make copies of that photograph, you're changing it. You're changing the work of art. It's not a simple copy, in other words, right? You're doubling it, first of all, and then multiplying it exponentially. And he says, Benjamin says, that such a process of reproduction, again, not monks copying texts in a monastery one by one, that's almost an act of love. He's talking about churning out all these reproductions of art. First of all, he says, authenticity, the mark of authenticity is gone.
That's right.
Everything else is a counterfeit. And he has this amazing term. He calls it the optical unconscious in regard to film, where he says that there's something about seeing a film actually being made, he would say, by the actor and the people on the set, that is something that cannot be reproduced. And of course that's right. In fact, you don't want that stuff reproduced for mass consumption, but that's the point. It becomes not singular, but multiple. And I always say, invoke Benjamin when I'm talking about the Bible, because what he says is you take a work of art and you strip it and you rip it out of its context, and then you move it over here. And so you can see a film made in Israel, and you can see it in Texas, and something's lost in that process. He says something is lost in the reproducibility and the dissemination of a work of art. He says as numerous copies of the artwork are made, the unique existence of the original piece is overwritten by the mass existence of its innumerable replicas. And he says, and I like this, that even viewing, not just making, but even viewing a work of art is itself a ritual. And so when you mass produce it, you've eliminated the ritual. Or maybe you've made the possibility of new rituals, but it probably doesn't happen that way, right? Theater is one of our last sacred spaces in the West, our last ritual spaces. And now we watch a film on our phone. It's different, right? That's Benjamin's point. All right. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein and Don DeLillo's 1982 novel, White Noise. Oh my God. If you don't know White Noise, maybe we should do White Noise this summer in our Passages series. How to explain White Noise? The protagonist is named Jack Gladley. He's a professor of Hitler studies at the College on the Hill. Stereotypical, I guess I should say, New England college. He teaches in his academic regalia with sunglasses, which I am going to do one day, I promise. But I'm not a professor of Hitler studies as he is. He has a new colleague named Murray Siskin. I forget Murray's title, but he's some kind of semiotician. He studies signs. And they, early in the novel, they go to see the most photographed barn in America. And so you know what's coming, right? I remember being at the Louvre and trying to see the Mona Lisa, and I couldn't get to it because everybody was in front of it taking photographs. And so I ended up watching the people taking photographs. Enter Benjamin. So they're standing there, this professor of Hitler studies and the semiotician, and Murray says, no one sees the barn. Once you've seen the signs about the barn, most photographed barn in America, 2 miles. Once you've seen the signs about the barn, it becomes impossible to see the barn. There is also the airborne toxic event. This is some sort of railroad car accident that releases some sort of strange chemical, and it panics everyone. And in fact, they call it the ATE, the airborne toxic event. And so everyone's evacuated. They go to this campground, and Jack goes to find his daughter, Steffi, and he's thinking about all that's happening, and he says this: the world is full of abandoned meanings. In the commonplace, I find unexpected themes and intensities. And I remember this is all the product of technology. There's an airborne toxic event because there's such a thing as railroad cars and hauling chemicals and such. He says he was ready to search anywhere for signs and hints, intimations of odd comfort. And the cloud, the airborne toxic event, Jack says, created in him a sense of awe that bordered on the religious. And so he goes to find his daughter among the refugees of the airborne toxic event. And he hears her. She's sleeping, but she's muttering something. And he thinks, this is it. This is it. There's this airborne cloud. There's no meaning anymore. It's just television and streams of data, and I can't make sense of it all. I need to make sense of it all. And he leans over and listens to what she's muttering. And it's Toyota Celica. And he says, that made it even more amazing. The world now seemed to have a ritual meaning, a part of a verbal spell or ecstatic chant. I should have saved this for our marketing lecture. He says it's these secondary levels of life, these extrasensory, right? Technology is an extension of your senses. Flashes and floating nuances of being, these pockets of rapport forming unexpectedly that made me believe we were a magic act. Adults and children together sharing unaccountable things. Murray says this: you have to learn how to look. You open yourself to the data. You open yourself to the data. TV offers incredible amounts of psychic data. It opens ancient memories of world birth. It welcomes us into the grid, the network of little buzzing dots that make up the picture pattern. The medium practically overflows with sacred formulas if we can remember how to respond innocently and get past our irritation, weariness, and disgust. There's more, but I want to close up here with, that's the making of Achilles' shield, by the way. And this is Jack Gladney in white noise going to the ATM. In the morning, I walked to the bank. I went to the ATM to check my balance. I inserted my card, entered my secret code, tapped out my request. The figure on the screen roughly corresponded to my independent estimate, feebly arrived at after long searches through documents, tormented arithmetic. Waves of relief and gratitude flowed over me. The system had blessed my life. I felt its support and approval. The system hardware, the mainframe sitting in a locked room in some distant city, what a pleasing interaction. I sensed that something of deep personal value, but not money, not that at all, had been authenticated and confirmed. A deranged person was escorted from the bank by 2 armed guards. The system, but there's always these moments in white noise where just something weird happens, supposedly unrelated. The system was invisible, which made it all the more impressive, all the more disquieting to deal with, but we were in accord, at least for now. And the title that we get tonight, An Appetite for Immortality, comes from white noise. And so you remember the opening scene, and now the final scene. And so our tools, which we have created, our techne, become our masters, and then ultimately, if we're lucky, our mothers. Thank you for your attention.